Welcome to Have a Life Teaching, the podcast designed for educators who are dedicated to enhancing their teaching practice and creating a positive impact on their students' lives. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of education, exploring a wide range of topics related to curriculum, instruction, and assessment in K-12 schools. Together, we'll learn from the brightest minds in the education field. So if you're a passionate educator who's ready to take your teaching practice to the next level, join us as we explore the exciting world of education. My name is John Shimbari, signing in and saying, let's have a life teaching. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Have a Life Teaching podcast. We've talked about writing on past episodes. We've also talked about reading strategies and ways that we can help our students to read better within their academic classrooms. But there's another aspect of literacy that I think deserves some attention. And given how important literacy is as really the baseline for any learning, because you can't do any content learning without just generally overall being literate. I think the other part of that equation, in addition to helping our students to learn how to become better readers, is also to establish literacy at the core of any school community. And because of this, I'm really excited today to be joined by my next guest on the podcast. Her name is Lorraine Radice. She is a PK-12 Director of Literacy in the state of New York and the author of a great new book about how to integrate literacy across your school community. And that book is titled Leading a Culture of Reading: How to Ignite and Sustain a Love of Literacy in Your School Community. So Lorraine, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
One question I like to ask my guests when they come on the show is how they got involved in and specialized in what it is that we're talking about on the podcast. So as I mentioned, I've talked before with people about writing strategies and reading strategies, but how did centering literacy at the core of school community specifically become an area of interest for you within education?
My value on literacy as the core of a community really started when I was teaching in the classroom. I was fortunate enough to be a literacy specialist, and then I became a sixth grade English teacher. And always my priority in my classroom was to build community, and reading was one of the ways in which I built community with my students. We prioritized time for reading together. We talked about books. My students had reading partners. Independent reading books were in my kids' hands during the first week of school because I wanted them to know that that was one of the most important things that we were going to do together. And reading makes for great conversation, great partnership, and an overall sense of support and togetherness within the four walls of the classroom. When I became a district leader, I was fortunate enough to be hired by a superintendent who her priority was literacy and to really create a culture that fostered an authentic love for reading, as well as to support students academically in their growth as readers. And one of the questions that she had asked me on my interview was, what are some ways in which you would build a thriving culture of reading in our district? And while that was exciting for me, that was also a little scary because I was a teacher at the time and I was responsible for the reading lives of my class, about 100 students. I was a middle school teacher. And what I did was I thought about ways in which I supported my own students, and I tried to bring those classroom practices to a district level because I transformed from an adult that was directly supporting kids to an adult that was directly supporting other adults who were going to support students in the classroom. And I always try to bring a very practical approach to my leadership. So just the way that I prioritized reading in my own classroom community, I brought some of those practices and those values to my work as a district leader. and began my journey in supporting other teachers and administrators and parents and caregivers, community members to all contribute to the reading lives of students.
Lorraine, you mentioned that shift was hard at first, shifting from teaching students to supporting and mentoring colleagues. And
Yes.
I agree. There are still differences between teaching children and collaborating and supporting the development of our colleagues. A two-part question. One, why do we need people such as yourself supporting this culture of literacy and supporting our colleagues? Because I'm sure people out there will say, well, didn't these other people go to school? Don't they understand the importance of reading? So that's my first part of the question. And then my second part of the question is, what has been your experience in supporting other adults in developing this culture of literacy? What's been going well? Where have the challenges been? Love your take on that.
Sure. So the first part of the question is, why do people need leadership around literacy culture?
Right, especially because, quote unquote, they learned this in teachers' college.
Well, one of the most important things for leaders to remember is, well, number one, we're all leaders for kids, teachers, administrators, staff. But one of the most important things for administrators to remember is that teachers are busy. They have a really grand, important job to do. And that is to work with kids in many capacities throughout the day. And my job is to specialize in this area of literacy and to read and to learn and to reflect and to get feedback from people on what they want to learn. And then I take all of that input from my colleagues who I work with, and then I design experiences that, in conjunction with my own classroom experiences, teaching students and also pre-service teachers, because I'm an adjunct professor as well. And I put that together in ways that can best support teams based on the feedback that they give me. I always like to come to professional development sessions with practical materials that teachers can bring to their classroom. One of the beautiful but also challenging parts about being a literacy leader is to read a lot of books that the kids that you teach might be interested in. But that takes time. Days are long and people are tired and life is busy. Part of what I do is I read a lot. I've built communities of teachers that love to read as well. And we get to know books that might be great to bring into our classroom libraries and our school libraries. And part of what I like to do is I like to book talk, and I might say, I've read this great book over the weekend, or I've been reading this great book. It would be great to put into a fourth grade book club unit of study. So that's part of my job, is to do a little bit of thinking and planning and reflecting for people, and to give them the tools and the suggestions and the resources that they might want to bring into the work that they do with students. Something that I think is also important with that is to build a culture in a way that it is malleable. I talk about bringing tools and resources and ideas to teachers and colleagues, but in a way that allows them to make it their own. People become a part of the culture by building it with you. You need to find ways that they can see themselves in the work. So it's never an approach where I'm saying, you have to do this, or this is going to work well. It's always about, how can we make this work for your students? Or tell me about your students. What are some of the things that they love? What are some of the things that they need? And let's put some things together that might help you move this work forward. While I am a school administrator, I really like to think about myself more as a partner to teachers, a thinking partner, a planning partner, a creative partner, whatever capacity in which they need or they want the partnership. I'm very flexible. My role is not the same for everybody. And I think that just like we approach students that way in the classroom, kids where they are, we design responsive instruction. I think leadership needs to be responsive as well.
Lorraine, what have been some of the more successful literacy culture building activities that you have worked on with other adults, in terms of, just like you said, activities that really utilize the thoughts, the strengths, the talents of your colleagues and were more successful than you could ever hope to imagine?
The first thing that we had worked on when we first started this literacy culture building initiative was to design a vision for what that culture would look like, what it would sound like, what it would feel like, and then to communicate that vision to all of the stakeholders that impact the literacy lives of students. And we tapped into the power of technology and social media. It's a part of how we exist in society. It's entertainment, it's information sometimes. So we created a logo and a hashtag called LB Reads for the district that I work in. And using the power of media and what is common for folks was a step toward communicating that message that we read in our district and reading is important. And I had first rolled this out to the elementary teachers. What I observed happen was that even though we started this initiative at the elementary level, the LB Reads initiative took off at the secondary level, even just in the environmental print in the school buildings. So people were creating bulletin boards with the LB Reads logo, and they had kids redesign book covers. And sometimes a visual and a statement that really captures what's important is something that people gravitate toward. That people who believe in their school community want to contribute to it. And then once we established the vision with the help of media and connectivity through technology, we started a series of reading culture building events like book swaps for adults to model some fun games and conversation prompts that teachers would bring into the classroom. And that started to happen on days before a vacation from school, where we wanted kids to have books to bring home. Teachers would do a book swap. Or before summer break, in some classrooms, teachers had a beach ball and they put questions on the stripes of a beach ball, and kids were talking about the books that they were reading, and they got to swap a book to make sure that they had a book in their backpack going into summer. We also did author visits, a lot of author visits, and to use technology and social media to connect with authors is a really great strategy. Some authors will connect with you via X or Instagram if that's their style. Virtual author visits have been very helpful, even through COVID. That really boomed, right? But we continue that practice. It's less expensive. You can reach a lot of people at one time. So making authors a part of your reading community is a way to really bring it to life. And then to put students in literacy leadership positions as well. For example, we had a school-wide book talk at the high school. We had 3 student leaders really take charge of that initiative. We did pair and author visit, and one of the students was the moderator and asked the author questions and was in charge of really designing that whole event. The One Book, One School initiatives are really wonderful to do as well. Ways that you can communicate the importance of reading for academic achievement, for pleasure, but also how you can use reading as a center point to bring people together in your community and hopefully bring joy and engagement. And that's what I talk a lot about in my book, that joy and engagement are really important in schools, and reading can be a way to bring people together around that.
And what really resonated with me, Lorraine, and what you were saying, and really excited me, was how involved your students were getting in discussing what they were reading. What have been some of the academic outcomes that you've seen from involving students in book swaps, or you mentioned the beach ball activity? What have been some of the positive outcomes you've seen to student academic growth by establishing a literacy culture across your schools?
Sure. So I'm describing a lot of things that have to do with reading engagement. There is a whole other curricular piece and an instructional piece to reading. But as we know, engagement, and motivation is part of how people learn, and it's part of why kids want to be in school. Because kids became engaged and motivated and were part of these thriving communities of reading within their classroom, where time is spent talking about their reading, time is spent talking about books. We also prioritize time for reading in school. There's a wealth of research that suggests that there are positive relationships between reading volume and reading achievement. That's one of the foundational ideas of my book as well. So prioritizing time for reading with conferences with teachers, focus for reading, and also reading for pleasure did lead to academic achievement. So we did see growth in our benchmark screening assessment that we use within the district. And then also anecdotal data. I work in a district where a lot of the teachers live in the community, and more people would stop me and say, my kid comes home and reads at night. My kid couldn't wait to come home and tell me about the book that they're reading. And for me, that is as valuable or even more valuable than the numerical achievement. I know that quantitative data is important, but the qualitative data was overwhelmingly positive, and those were markers of success for the work.
So now, Lorraine, I'm very curious because you work with not only adults, but students in developing this love of reading. What have been some of the more popular topics or themes that you have seen kids really getting into, say, on the elementary level, the middle school level, and the high school level? What has really gotten kids excited?
What types of books? You mean genres and things like that?
Exactly.
Elementary students love graphic novels or illustrated books. Those are extremely popular. Also, they love nonfiction as well. We have research club units in our curriculum, and we have 2 of those in most years of the elementary years. So reading about topics of interest is always very exciting for elementary kids. And then as we get into 4th, 5th, 6th grade, fantasy becomes very popular. Kids love fantasy. And then when we get into middle school, they love books that also are series on Netflix. And there's that old question of what's better, the book or the movie. But kids have access to so much now that there are so many movies that are books and vice versa. And there's so many book series that are now shows on these streaming platforms that kids are on. And I say, if you can use Netflix as a secret passageway into getting a kid to love to read, then you should go for it. That has been a support for reading in some cases, media that kids are involved in. And then dystopian becomes very popular in 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th grade. Romantic comedies in the early years of high school. So you have The Summer I Turned Pretty. That's a series on Amazon Prime. And just in little areas in which we've gotten feedback from kids on what they want to read, that series in particular, that trilogy, has really impacted the reading lives of many young adults in our schools. Kids want to read them in partnerships. They're going to the library asking for book number 3. I can walk into a 9th grade classroom and an 11th grade classroom, and I see at least 2 kids reading that book. And then we get into the real young adult years of junior and senior year of high school. There are some kids that are interested in reading classics. They've heard parents talk about them, or they're exposed to different classics in school, so they're interested in exploring those. Nonfiction books, Atomic Habits or Outliers, things that might get them ready to be thinking about the next step in life after high school, and more adult fiction.
What are some of your favorites? If there are school teachers, administrators out there looking to start to develop this culture of literacy, you mentioned The Summer I Turned Pretty, Outliers, I think you mentioned. You mentioned 1 or 2 others. But anyway, what have been some of your favorites that you could recommend to school communities that might not know where to start?
Sure. So I mentioned nonfiction, the elementary level, the transitional time between elementary and middle school. There's a great collection of books called From an Idea to, and then there's Lego, Nike, Disney, and it's a great accessible nonfiction book for young readers for them to learn about the company of Disney and how it came to be, and the company of Lego. It's a great collection to talk about innovation and perseverance and creative thinking.
And college and career readiness.
Yes, exactly. And because Nike and Lego and Disney are really mainstreams, kind of pop culture organizations, kids know about them for the most part. While I said upper elementary, those books could really be read at any age. If you want to learn about Lego, then read a nonfiction book written for young readers. You'll learn. That's the beauty of nonfiction. And I also am a huge middle grade novel fan. I think that comes from being a middle school teacher. A Rover Story is a great book that was published within the last 2 years. And it's a great story about really contemplating the place that technology has in the human life and what is more valuable, human interaction and human emotion, or the power of machinery. So that's a really great middle grade novel to explore. The Remarkable Journey of Coyote Sunrise by Dan Gamenhart is a great story. The Midnight Children, those are some of my favorites that I've actually read in book club with teachers and have led to some really great conversation, both fiction and the nonfiction as well.
We've talked a little bit about some of the projects you've engaged in your district. We've talked about some of your favorite topic areas that students in different grade levels are interested in. If a school was to go full force into developing a culture of literacy across their school community, again, you've done so many amazing things. You've tied it into speakers. And by the way, we have had an earlier episode on bringing in guest speakers. What would you recommend for schools just starting out? What are, say, 2 or 3 things they should do right away to get this culture of literacy going?
I think forming a team of people who are passionate about this work is a great strategy so that you can collaborate and work together. You had posed a question before that I wanted to add to about, we're talking about school-wide community culture. It is very challenging to get every person in a school community on board. There are going to be people who will want to lead in this work with you because they just believe so much in the power of what literacy can do for a community. There will be a large group of people who will take the leadership, take the resources, make it their own, bring it into their classroom because they want to contribute to their school community and they want to be a part of the culture. And then there are some people who, when they see your email, they'll look away. And that's just the reality of being a leader or starting a new project. And that's okay. It took me a long time to accept that because when you feel so passionately about something and there is so much information and research that supports the work that I describe in the book, you say, why don't you want to do this? But everybody is entitled to their own jam. And I think accepting that not everybody is going to always have the pom-poms as big as you at first is just part of the work. Finding that team to work with I think is a really nice first step. When you put that team together, like I mentioned before, you want to create a clear vision for the work, some goals with some action items that can bring that vision to fruition. The vision becomes almost tangible as you walk through your school building. And after you have the vision, you want to communicate that vision to all people involved, staff, community members, Board of Education members, administrators, teachers, students, parents, caregivers. And just like we talked about being responsive before, although the vision is uniform, the way in which people engage with the vision based on what stakeholder group they're in might be a little bit different, right? So the way that we support teachers is a little bit different in the way that we support parents. But part of those actionable items to reach your goals should be how to support the different stakeholders so that they feel that they are part of this culture, that the culture is going to build and develop together in the best interest of the students. Then the second or the third thing is to really prioritize the time to do the work in school. Like I said before, schools are busy places. Teachers are responsible for a lot of things. There's always a new initiative. But if you make a commitment as a teacher or as a leadership team to really prioritize reading, to give access to students to high quality texts that they are interested in their classroom libraries, their school libraries, to prioritize time for kids to talk with each other about what they're reading. Those are some ways in which you can get started with that culture building right away. And then you insert those special culture building events that I described throughout the book in ways that work for your school community. Author visit may not be possible in all classrooms or schools like your first year. That's okay. You can choose something else that people will want to rally around and spread joy through reading throughout the community.
Lorraine, let's talk about an elephant in the room, the book banning and censorship topic. Have you found that it has affected this work, and how have you maneuvered around it?
I have not found that it's affected this work because I speak about and I write about this work from the lens that all contexts are different. These are ideas, they're suggestions, and a common thread that like I said, that I write about and I talk with folks about is here are some ideas in which you can start to build your culture with. But every school and every classroom is different. And in some cases, I give some ways to do each of those events differently to match the needs of the community. And then as far as books specifically, part of this is about giving readers choice. So kids and families can choose what they're comfortable with reading, what they want to read. It doesn't really impact the way that culture is built because I've designed my message in a way that hopefully is supportive, no matter what the vision is of that specific learning community.
Makes sense to me. And you've also highlighted and referenced parents. Any thoughts there on how to involve parents specifically in this initiative?
I dedicate an entire chapter to supporting parents and caregivers because they are instrumental in the lives of children and in partnership with school. There are specific ways in which we've worked to support parents and caregivers in supporting their children, their reading life at home. One way is that we have designed parent academies, or call them learning academies. That's one example of how, if you don't like that term parent academy, I give a lot of other examples in how you can brand that message. We have thematic events for parents to come to on how to support their children with reading at home, how to coach their kids at home through challenging pieces of how to coach kids to persevere. We did a parent academy on artificial intelligence earlier this school year. So those shift and change, right, based on how parents are needing to respond to their kids at home. And we put supports in place to really widen the access to make sure that we reach as many parents and caregivers as possible. So when we host in-person events, all of the material is sent home in multiple languages. There are cases where childcare is provided. So we have volunteers from the Honor Society at the high school or the middle school, and they provide some space to color and read with young children while parents attend the school event. I've provided transportation for families in need to get to the location of the Parent Academy. And we also have done some parent events virtually now because sometimes doing things via Zoom opens up the access. So we've done different things to really try to reach as many parents as possible. And a common message that I talk with parents and caregivers about is supporting kids at home with reading doesn't require you to be a reading teacher. Kids get instruction in school. And I say that to ease maybe some of the nerves and anxieties within parents that they feel that they have to be teaching their kids to read. And that's not true. Reading with the child, having a child read to you, asking a few questions about what happened first, what happened next, and then what happened last. Tell me about your favorite part. Why did you like the character? That goes a long way. The instructional part will happen in school, but the fostering of the love of reading and even the community that can build within a home around reading is something that I talk with parents about often.
I love how you talked about the community that can be built at home, because in addition to actually talking about the reading, that could lead to conversations across the generations.
Yeah.
As we both know, Lorraine, how many times have we talked to young people? How was school? Good.
Yeah.
Anything going on?
Nothing.
Everything's fine. And that's as much as you can get out of them. But in a way, it's almost this establishing this culture of literacy is almost in a way a sneaky way of actually getting in that family time.
Yes. And as kids get older, I mentioned a couple of things there that seemed more appropriate for maybe younger children. But as kids get older, sometimes parents can read or read about books that kids are reading either in school or that they're reading for independent reading. The adult can recommend a book to the child to read. Again, if it's an older reader, talking to parents about how that relationship changes as kids mature is helpful too.
Exactly. And now I actually give books to my parents to read.
Yeah,
So it
right.
goes both ways.
Yep.
So, Lorraine, we've talked about a lot of different aspects of establishing a literacy community. Anything we haven't talked about that you feel the listener should know?
One of the things that you had mentioned is in maybe our earlier conversation is why should other people care about this work? Why should other educators care about this work? While the book is about specific strategies and provides resources for building a culture around reading or literacy, the book also speaks universally to the power of culture. And while I focus culture around reading, culture could be focused around anything. It could be focused around innovation. It could be focused around mental health. It could be focused around social emotional learning. Whatever it is your school community believes in and wants to rally around, that's an important part of what I try to establish in each of the chapters. That the culture is really the heartbeat of what happens in school. Those ideas of joy and engagement really are emphasized. And knowing your people is an important part of this work too. You want to set the adults in a school community up to be successful and capitalize on their strengths. So culture is a really, really important part of leadership work and making people feel like they belong to something that's really powerful for themselves as professionals and also for their students.
Lorraine, where can people find out more about you and this amazing work that you're doing?
People can visit my website, lorrainemradice.com. They also can find me on social media, Instagram and X, Lorraine M. Radice. And there's a way to contact me on my website. I welcome people to connect with me to talk about this work, and I would look forward to it.
Thank you so much, Lorraine, for your time tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening today. I hope you got some great tips that you can bring back into your teaching. Remember, have a life teaching without sacrificing your own. Also, don't forget to subscribe and be well.